Hello, mates. Let's continue our conversation on Stoicism. We were going over the moral letters by Seneca, and I found letter 33 quite interesting one. Now, it is long, so I will read you only a part of it. It's very interesting. You may remember from earlier letters that he tends to, or at least ended the letters initially with quotes, often from Epicurus. And he opens letter 33 with, "From Seneca to Lucilius, greetings. You request that I should close these letters, as I did the earlier ones, with quotations, and that I should take them from the leaders of our own school." That's very interesting. Now I'm going to skip around a little bit. And then he says, "And so you have no cause to demand excerpts and quotations. The kind of remark that is excerpted from other authors can be found without intermission in the writings of our school," Stoicism. "Thus, we do not have the eye-catchers you have in mind. With us, the buyers are not disappointed by entering the shop and finding nothing more than was hung up outside. We let them choose to display items from any point in the text they happen to prefer. Just suppose we did want to separate a few individual sayings from the throng. To whom would we attribute them? To Zeno? To Cleanthes? To Chrysippus? To Posidonius? To Panetius? We are not under a monarch. Each of us asserts his own freedom. Among the Epicureans, anything Hermarchus said or Metrodorus is attributed solely to one individual. In that camp, everything anyone says is said under the guidance and auspices of one man. We, however, have such a number of resources, all equally fine, that we cannot separate out just one, even if we try. I repeat, we cannot, only the pauper keeps count of his herd. Wherever you cast your eyes, you will read something that could have been outstanding if the remainder were not equally good. For this reason, you must give up hope that you will ever be able to take just a quick sampling from the works of the greatest men. You must read them as wholes, come to grips with them as wholes. The subject matter is treated along the lines that are proper to it, and an intellectual product is devised from which nothing can be removed without a collapse. Still, I have no objection to you studying the individual limbs, provided you retain the actual person. A beautiful woman is not the one whose ankle or shoulder is praised, but the one whose overall appearance steals our admiration away from the individual parts. But if you insist, I will not be stingy with you, but will deal them out by the fistful. There are piles of them lying about. One only has to pick them up. There is no need to collect them. They come not by dribs and drabs, but in a steady flow, all interconnected." Okay, so one sentence from section 8. "So I feel that all those people who are never authors but always interpreters, concealing themselves in the shadow of another, have nothing noble in them, for they have never dared to put into action what they have been so long in learning." Okay, there's a couple of thoughts that I had. There are a couple of thoughts that I had as I was reading this. And first of all, I think we have to put this in historical context. So I'm pretty sure the remarks he's making about Epicureanism are based in the fact that the Epicureans were encouraged to really, really revere, almost worship Epicurus. They had to memorize his birthday. They had to memorize certain of his sayings. So the Epicurean garden, where Epicurus taught, must have been an interesting place. That almost sounds like a cult, right? The Stoics were a little different because the leaders of the Stoic school, starting off with Zeno, the founder, made it very clear that they were not to be worshipped. There is a reason Epicureanism is called Epicureanism. It was named after the founder. Stoicism is not called Zenoism. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's described in Diogenes Laertius, but it could be another source, that people initially called or wanted to call that school Zenoism. Now, as with any type of description of the lives of famous people. We may have to take this with a grain of salt, but the story goes that people wanted to call that philosophy school Zenoism, and that Zeno said, no, we're not going to do that. It's not about me. Now, even if that's not true, it's well found, right? It's a nice story. And it really illustrates an important point of Stoicism. It's not about your fame. It's about the principles that help you be a better person. And that's very important, I think. So having said that, we can now dissect these passages a bit more, right? I think it's very interesting what Seneca wrote about you can't just approach an endeavor like this as, well, here's a quote, here's another quote, I like this quote, here's another quote, it's a good quote. Quotes have an advantage, which is that often they're memorable. They're short, you can easily memorize them. Like, for example, some things are within your control, other things are not within your control. That's the opening of Epictetus' Enchiridion. Easy to remember, right? And that makes it easy for you to come back to that when you need it. But having said that, you have to look at the overall thing. Stoicism consists of three important components. It's not just the Stoic ethics, which is what we are talking about almost exclusively. There was also the Stoic logic, and there was Stoic physics, right? Which is not so applicable to everyday life questions, but about thinking about the universe or logic, right? Anyway, you have to look at the whole picture. You cannot just cherry pick and select those things that you like and discard the rest. If you choose to commit to something like, I want to try to be Stoic with a capital, then you need to look at the whole teachings and not just at little sound bites and snippets here and there. Okay. So that's one part of it. I think another part that he's making in this letter is that he says this. He's talking about people who don't write about it but just interpret things. And I just looked at the camera in that sort of ironic way because, of course, that's what I'm doing in these videos, right? But he raises a very good point here. They have trained their memories on other people's words, but remembering is one thing, knowing is something else. Remembering is keeping track of something you have committed to memory. Knowing, by contrast, is making all those things your own, not having to depend on a model or to keep looking at your teacher for instructions. Zeno said this and Cleanthes that. Let there be some distance between you and the book. How long will you be a pupil? Now, be a teacher as well. Why should I listen to things I can read? It makes a big difference when things are spoken aloud, he says. Not when the speaker is only borrowing someone else's words, as a copyist might do. In other words, apply what you have learned. And I've said this a number of times, but this is an important thought, I would say, to keep in mind. You can't just say, when everything in your life is going perfectly well and you're as happy as you've ever been, so to speak, that is not the moment to say, I'm a Stoic. Because that doesn't really make sense. It sounds a bit like Professor Tagglebury. That doesn't work, does it? What's the point? When things start to break down, when they fall apart, if you can then still say, I'm a Stoic. It's hard. Some days are easier than other days. Overall, it's hard, but I'm really doing my best to be a Stoic. Then we're talking. And I had to think of a friend of my parents that we would, once in a while, we would have dinner with. He had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So he was in a wheelchair. I remember this vividly because as a child, this left an impression. He was in a wheelchair. He could not move, so he lost all voluntary muscle control. He could not move on his own. He could not breathe. He could not eat or drink. He could not speak. But he was cognitively fully conscious and completely aware. It's a pretty terrifying disease. And he seemed really quite content. Him and his wife seemed really close. And of course, you only get a glimpse of someone when you have dinner once in a while. But what I'm trying to say is, How much more can things suck? You're paralyzed. You can't eat or drink anything. You can't speak. You can't walk. You can't even breathe on your own. That does not sound like a particularly fun time to me. But he was probably one of the most stoic people I've ever met, because he would joke. He couldn't speak, but he had a sort of an I alphabet that his wife could interpret, and then she could vocalize what he was trying to say, which in itself was remarkable. But he would joke about things, and he would make puns, and he would do those things. And I have no illusions. I'm sure he had harder days, but he had things that he liked. He had his relationship, and he collected dinky toys. You know, the cars, little cars. He had a whole display cabinet full of them, and he could talk about all of them and what made them special. And he had a computer he could control with his eyes, with an eye tracker. And he would go on eBay and he would just order new dinky toys. And then they would come and he would have them. He couldn't like unpack them, but he would, they would be put away, and he would look at them. He had that collection. If you can do that, then I think you're really a Stoic, right? But then you are getting away from just saying and you're actually doing. And that's hard. That's the trick, isn't it? So it doesn't suffice to stick to little bits of quotes. You have to really apply what you read, what you learn into your everyday life. And I think we sometimes forget that. We live in an age that is very quotable. You have Instagram quotes and quotes on Facebook and like all that kind of stuff. But you have to live it. Otherwise, what's the point? It doesn't suffice to just say, yes, some things are within your control and other things are not within your control. You have to, if you want to go down that path, you have to believe it, and you have to do it, make that happen, actually live that. That's it for now, I think. I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you next week for more talk about Stoicism. Thanks for watching. Bye!